Aaron Blabey is the author and illustrator of these massively popular books like the Bad Guys series and the picture books Pig the Pug and Thelma the Unicorn. I recently drove down to New York City to interview Aaron at Scholastic headquarters and help him launch his brand new book, Cat on the Run, the first in a trilogy, which is set within the world of the Bad Guys books. Now, Aaron has sold something like 45 million copies of his books, but I would say the most important 10 or 12 of those copies are right here in the Krosoczka house, because I absolutely loved reading those books to my son. We read them during the pandemic, so they were just this really fun and bright spot in a really difficult time. And we loved the Bad Guys movie that DreamWorks put out. We saw it on opening weekend. So Aaron lives in Australia, and I caught him on the launch day of his new book. I cannot wait for you to read the new book. I can't wait for you to learn about Aaron and his life growing up in rural Australia. This is Aaron Blabey's origin story.
Origin Stories with JJK.
Jarrett
Krosoczka.
Hey guys. That's good. We didn't even rehearse that.
No, it was amazing. Hello. How you doing?
So, Aaron, the first question that I would like to throw your way, tell me what your world was like when you were a kid.
When I was a kid, so I'm Australian, obviously. I lived in regional areas that were very dry, and if anyone here has seen the first Mad Max film, it was shot nearby where I lived, so it looked like that. Yeah.
Did you get to see them filming, or?
No, I was too little. But I was obsessed with that film when I was a kid because it was local. It was
home.
And it was and it was kind of evidence that there was something cool that could be done around there. But yeah, I grew up in a place where the only thing that was a valid pastime was sport. It was Australian rules football, which none of you would have heard of, I'm sure. But that was, and I was already a dreamy kid who wanted to make stuff, and everybody thought I was insane, pretty much.
Did you play sports as a kid?
No,
Yeah,
no, but you didn't?
No.
My dad, who's a very sweet man, and I love him to bits, but his only interest to this day really is football, and he just couldn't believe what he'd been given as a baby, I don't think. But he's enormously proud now, but at the time just confused for years and years.
So you were like an island in every aspect of like, I mean,
absolutely,
where you were and where you were in the family, and I assume in school as well. You must have had some adults, though, I imagine, that fostered your interest.
It was a teacher. There was one, and I moved all the time when I was a kid, from town to town, and I'm an only child, so I was always alone. And I had a teacher in year 7, so in your middle school. I went to my first high school where I was able to stay for a little while, and I had an English teacher who, I don't know how he initiated it, but he encouraged me to write stories, which I just suddenly was doing, and they were outrageous. I remember they were quite startlingly, I don't know, inappropriate, but they were really irreverent, and he just kept stoking that fire. And I dedicated one of the pig books to him, which he was really chuffed about. I hadn't seen him in like 35 years, and I didn't tell him either. I just let him discover it, and he sent me an email. But yeah, he was the one person who, it wasn't, he didn't say anything necessarily. He just kept saying, "Can you do another one of those? That was funny."
Right, but that's very loving and giving, because what you could have done is said, let's talk about this kid's problems. Like, you need to cut that out or knock that off.
Absolutely. And my boys, I've got 2 boys, they're 15 and 18, almost 18 now, but they, all the way through school, reading and the subject of English has been that I've had to really push them to be interested in it in a way that I never had to be. And I feel like in Australia, at least, the school system has changed. It's become much less free, I think, than it was. It's been more and more controlled and more done by committee, I suppose. And I don't know if a teacher like Mr. Murray would be able to exist the way that he did back in '86, when I was in that year. So yeah, I was very lucky. And then, well, I guess I went and did a trillion other things that had nothing to do with writing for a really long time, but I think it was just that idea that he was the first person who went, you can make stuff.
You've got something there.
Yeah.
So he really was a lifeline for you.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so at what point in your life then did you say, I could use my imagination, I could write and draw? I assume you were always drawing as a kid too, were you doodling as well?
I was until that year, until year 7, and then there was a kid in my class, his name is Sam Jinks, and he could draw hyperrealism in year 7. He's now a hyperrealist sculptor. They're breathtaking, they're like a human being, they're extraordinary. And I sat down next to him in the first week of that year and went, I can't draw, and I stopped. And I didn't draw for almost 20 years.
Oh wow, 20 years.
Yeah,
that's a tragedy.
Absolutely. When I think about that, it takes my breath away.
Where was Mr. Murray when you needed him?
I know, absolutely. And when I haven't, we were talking about visiting schools earlier, and I haven't visited schools in ages now, just because of the work rate of the books. But when I did, one of the recurring stories I would talk to kids about was. I would tell them the story about Sam, and I would say, just as a cautionary tale, do not do that.
No.
I regret that enormously. If I'd kept drawing, I just always think about how much better I would be if I'd had another 20 years of experience that I didn't have,
Because everyone has their own voice, everybody has their own handwriting, everybody has their own way to draw.
Absolutely. And I think part of the charm of these is the fact that and I'm going to contradict myself here, but perhaps the reason the drawings are popular in the books is because they are a little bit scrappy and a little bit unrefined, which is probably because of that big long cap, maybe. I don't know.
Well, I mean, your artwork is very, very charming. And
thank you.
And perhaps if you pursued art in a way that you thought you had to draw hyper realistically, you never would have gotten to this, right?
Yeah.
Because obviously it does one no good to say, I wish I go back in time, because you can't, right? Everything happened, and it happened for whatever reason, and it brought you to here. So in those 20 years that you weren't drawing, and you had this wild imagination that ostracized you from peers and your own father, what were you doing?
So the one thing that got me through childhood was movies. I was obsessed with them because they were evidence of a world beyond where I was. So I made, at 17, an adolescent choice to go, well, I love movies, I should be in movies. So I decided to become an actor, which I did for nearly 13 years, and I am a truly terrible actor.
So if we were to look you up on IMDb...
You won't, though.
I mean, I won't now because I'm not getting services.
You won't look me up on IMDb.
So if you were looking for info about the Bad Guys films, would we then scroll down and see something you were in?
No.
No, not at all?
No, you won't be doing that.
Okay. What kind of work?
It was in Australia. It was mostly theatre, mostly TV. And I just lost my way. I didn't enjoy it. I never felt comfortable. I always felt, all the actors, because when you watch as many movies as I do, I had an acute sense of what good acting was, and it was not what I was doing. And it's because, and I think part of the problem is because what lent to kind of creating a little universe with my world is that I like to sort of hover above and look at the whole picture like a director does, I suppose. Yeah. That's the last thing an actor should be doing. An actor should be just inside the character that they're playing, and I was never particularly good at that. I was always sort of levitating above the scene a little bit. So I think that was part of the problem. But I acted, and then eventually and I worked all the time, but I was just, I don't know, it was just not good. And then I eventually because I wasn't enjoying it, I started to paint like 20 years after I stopped drawing. I just had this impulse to paint. I started painting pictures, and they were pretty bad for a long time, but then they got better. But I was painting girls. I didn't know what else to paint. I was just painting things that, I was just learning to use paint and painting sort of pretty pictures, really. And it seemed kind of a little pointless. And then I thought, well, what about if I took the story that I loved from movies and what I was trying to reach for in acting and put it together with the pictures? And it's such a no-brainer, but I wrote my first picture book. And it was the collision of those two things. But in between, because I never had any money, I picked grapes. I worked in a video store. Eventually I taught design for a while. In a truly awful period, right at the end before Pig the Pug took off, I worked in advertising, and I hated every second of it. So yeah, I did all kinds of things constantly, because my first 8 books, they were warmly received, but they didn't really sell in any big numbers. So I had 2 little kids by then, so I couldn't make a living from it.
I get that.
Yeah, and it's until this guy came out, I was always just holding on by the skin of my teeth. Yeah.
Yeah. Do you remember what was that video game? It was an Atari video game where you're swinging on a vine and you have to catch the next vine.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I tell my therapist what being an author is like.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
And so you were living and such a stressful life where you had this passion, you had some books out. Were they published in the States and in Australia, or first just in Australia?
So they were published by and they did a really, really quite poor job with them. And they also, when I look at those books now, they feel like baby pictures to me a little bit, or they feel like they're in black and white compared to like in sepia. They feel like the beginnings of something. But yeah, I poured my heart into every single one of them. As you know, you do working other jobs, and just every time was this deep, deep, desperate yearning to just create something, and you just release the dove. And
then a hawk comes
yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, it'd be Tommy gunned out of the sky. Yeah, it was. That's how it felt again and again and again and again and again and again and again. And then the Scholastic in Australia just approached me. They liked what the publisher in Australia really liked. I have a book called Noah Dreary, which is one of those early books, which is about a boy who complained so much that his head fell off. And it's, and I was really fond of that book. It's very odd, and not to everyone's taste, but the publisher of Scholastic in Australia really liked it and he said the simplest thing, but he said, would you consider doing a book with us? And would you consider, instead of using, because all my early books had people in them, and he said, would you consider doing what you do, but do it with animals? And I was around 40. The kids were, you talked earlier today about, what was the reference you gave? But that last, the 8 Mile, Eminem's 8 Mile.
Yes, the Eminem 8 Mile moment.
Yeah, where you've got one shot and
that bass line is kicking in as you're doing the art for the book.
That's it. And I thought, if this doesn't work, I've got to let this go. And this sounds like pure nonsense, but it's true. I went for a walk. One day we moved I convinced my family to move to this little country town, and I went for a walk, and in about an 8-hour period, I had the idea for Pig the Pug, the bad guys, and THELMA the Unicorn. Wow. They just fell out of the sky. I'll never understand. I've gone for walks since, and nothing even remotely similar.
And all you get out of it is a heart health.
Yeah.
It's stupid.
Yeah. But it just happened, and then it was ridiculous. Like right from it felt, I'm sure it wasn't overnight, but it certainly felt that way. Pig came out. The print run of Pig was bigger than the first print run of Pig was bigger than the collective print run of all my previous books, all 8 of them. And he came out and was immediately popular. And then The Bad Guys, which I wrote thinking there would never be more than one of them. I just thought I'm going to write precisely what I would. I was trying to get my little boy to get interested in books because he was being sent home with consistently dreary books from school that it was just poor choices. You know, in Australia there's often a tub of books at the front of the classroom that they have to take home as readers, and they're just really old and jaded, and he'd come home and he used to make him cry, the idea of reading a book. It was like, oh no, and I just wanted to write something that would make him laugh, and I wrote Bad Guys 1, and I thought this won't necessarily go anywhere, and it came out in the book fairs here and just blew up. Like it changed my life. It's the collective sales of all my previous books was like 90,000 or something, and the Bad Guys 1 did like 500,000 in like a week, and it just was like what? And yeah, everything was different all of a sudden.
I mean, it goes to show something that I often talk to young authors and young artists about. Is that your biggest success is just around the corner, and you'll never know that unless you keep hanging in there and turning corners.
It's persistence. Yeah. It really is. It's persistence, and just it sounds so cheesy, but it's that you can't lose a belief in magic as well. I know that sounds so glib, but it's true. You just have to maintain a belief in. There was always a little voice that was always just whispering and saying, you can't stop. And Ty was 11 years ago we met. She worked at my previous publisher, and she was the one person who was also saying, you got to keep doing it. And at the point where I was well and truly ready to give it up. It's just if you just stick at it and just keep making choice, because that's the thing. All of these, none of my book ideas came from, I wasn't looking at or referencing anything in the children's book world in a way. They all were very specific to my experience and things that I love. Like The Bad Guys doesn't really make any sense. We pitched it as the movie as Tarantino for kids, which is an insane thing to say, but it's because all the things that I genuinely loved were the things that weren't necessarily for kids, but I had kids, and my relationship with my boys was, I would always try to make them laugh, and I would always show them things that I think they would think were cool. And I thought, well, I can't show them Pulp Fiction, so I'll write something that has a flavour of that they'll go, oh, that's awesome. I can take the iconography of that and put it into a context that they can dig. And I didn't know if that would. It seemed like it's the actions of a man who had nothing left to lose, I think, is what that is. And I did it, and it worked, you know. And then I've just and Pig is another example. Like, pugs are adorable, and everybody loves pugs. And I thought, what if I make one so reprehensible that
I have 2 pugs at home.
Yeah. And it just struck me. And I grew up with little toy dogs. My parents had them, a pug and a sausage dog, and a wiener dog.
By toy dogs, you mean like small dogs?
Yeah, little dogs. Yeah. And I grew up with them, and they were really. My parents they were completely untrained and really yappy, and as a teenager, I always found them a little bit annoying. And when I wrote this, it just struck me as a funny idea that you take an extremely cute animal and make them ghastly, and then put that in the context of a children's book. And again, that seemed kind of crazy, but he was the one that, especially in Australia for some reason, he just took off really fast. And I think it was the fact that when he falls out the window in the first book, I don't know if you've read it, but he's for those of you who haven't, he is a mean little dog who won't share his toys, and he stacks up all the toys and says they're all mine. And then he just falls out the window and ends up in a full body cast. And it's an outrageous concept for a picture book, but it just struck a chord. And then each one of the stories, he became like, because what's lovely is it's about all the worst things about us as people, and then you just take another terrible quality that people can have, and then the foil is Trevor, the poor little wiener dog who he lives with, who is a delightful little dog, and through him we see how not to behave. And again, that is, and especially, picture books are generally so wholesome, and he's not. And I think there's something in that, I don't know, if I'd approached it by looking at what other people were doing, he wouldn't exist, It came from a very strange and personal and individual place. And again, just Hail Mary. They were all just Hail Marys.
Because you had nothing to lose.
Yeah, that's right.
And what's wild to think about is that, there you are, you're in Australia, you're writing these books, you're stressed, you're not sure if this is going to work out.
Yeah.
But then fast forward in time, and in Northampton, Massachusetts, like, I'm reading your books to my son.
Yeah.
Our family friend, Finn, who's now a senior in high school, but when he was in about 4th grade, he was obsessed with our pugs, so he got a pug, named it Pig, after your books. And to think about how, like, there is, I'm sure, not just the pug named Pig in my town, but like that there must be so many Pig the Pugs around the world, thanks to you. Yeah. Like, you're a big part of people's lives.
It's a very peculiar feeling. I know, and the movie was a very strange feeling. And when we were pitching the movie, and the fact that we would be in Hollywood and dealing with studios and people, and everybody sight unseen knew the characters and were reading them at home, and that happens more and more. And you just never know now whose home these books are in, because they're
never know.
Yeah, and it is the strangest feeling. But I was talking about this the other day. It sort of goes back to what I was talking about, that shift that occurs. I remember really vividly that back cover image of them in the car. I was really proud of that painting, and this is like 10 years ago. I took that picture and I put Bad Guys Episode 1 coming soon, and I put it on Facebook, and I thought, this is going to blow people's minds, and it got 14 likes. And that same image is the image of the movie poster. It's the dudes in their car. And last year I was standing in Times Square in front of it, and it was just like 9 years from 14 likes to there.
It goes to show, especially, I know a lot of young artists that are coming up, like teenage artists. It's brutal for them when they put their art online, and either no one likes it or get a lot of negative criticism.
Yeah.
And so that's such a testament to, like, anything that's happening on your phone is not real.
Yeah. I can't do it at all now. So it's sort of bringing it to Cat on the Run. That's partially why I've done a book about how quickly the internet can turn on you. Because I kind of watch my boys dealing with social media, and it's so stressful. You've got to be so careful. You've got to be so smart about and you've got to be so bulletproof in terms of what can come at you. And I'm far too sensitive to have, so I don't engage at all now. I just have my website and let other people more qualified to handle all that. I can't do it.
So for the audience, Cat on the Run, which was just published yesterday, it's about Princess Beautiful, and she is a social media star. Something happens in which she's framed, but everyone thinks that she has the nuclear codes and she's going to blow up the world. And literally everybody turns on her.
Yeah.
And she reminds me a bit of Miss Piggy in that she's like this comical, over-the-top diva.
Yeah.
And then it becomes like Leslie Nielsen. What is that? I don't know, any of his movies we have to run, or Harrison Ford, The Fugitive.
Yes.
Yeah,
that's right. It's a social media driven version of The Fugitive with a highly strung cat.
Yeah.
Basically. And it exists in the same universe as the Bad Guys.
Yes, that was really cool. That to see that in the background illustrations, you see little glimpses of the bad guy characters, and it's the same news reporter.
That's right.
Yeah.
So it actually works as a prequel because it's before the bad guys went good. They're still shady. They're still on the FBI's most wanted list.
Is it the Blabeyverse?
Yeah, the Blabeyverse. That's right. Yeah. That's it. I got a trademark there.
Yeah, there you go. Wait, it turns up on the screen. Blabeyverse trademark. So you had great success with the Bad Guys movie, which, so for anyone who knows anything about Hollywood, is so difficult. You have to have so many planets aligned, and you have to survive so many different teams who get fired and then rehired and placed in different positions. And it achieved something that so few book adaptations do, which is it felt like the book on the screen.
Yeah.
You know, the characters felt like the characters we knew from the books. There were some, a few scenes that, like, I remember that scene, but like, I think the beauty of a book adaptation isn't to see the book on screen beat by beat by beat, because it's a different medium, and I think any movie that tries to be too close to the book, it ends up being a really boring film. So could you talk a little bit about the blood, sweat, and tears you had to shed to get it to that point? And by that meaning, so anyone knows anything about Hollywood, the only time you have power as the author is right before you sign the contract. And after that, they'll say, oh, we'll show you what we're working on, but they really don't necessarily care about your opinion unless you endear yourself to them in some way.
Yeah.
So it's just the accent? I need Australian accent. Americans love accents.
They do. But I actually think one of the things that really helped is all those years of being so deeply obsessive about movies, and having been, and all those years I wasted as an actor, and all those years that I suddenly found myself, and all the years in advertising that I hated, it formed a skill set that made me unexpectedly good in those Hollywood rooms. I could speak the language, and I could shoot down bad ideas and argue for better ones. And it's a really complex situation, because you're absolutely right. You can't say it should be like this. You have to convince people really gently that we could make them all into bananas or something, but what if we kept them like this, and then argue really well why.
And
that's
then when the
case.
Executive claims that as their idea,
Well,
you say, brilliant.
That's right, and that actually happens a lot. It is amazing how that, but it's, if you just, and Thelma the Unicorn she's out next year, the film. It's a big animated musical on Netflix, and she is looking great now. That's been a long process too. But The Bad Guys was 6 years from selling the idea to selling the book to the movie coming out. And yeah, the main concern for me was making sure the characters all felt like the characters. The story, it didn't matter to me so much. I love that they used the cat in the tree, and that they used Snake eating all the guinea pigs and all of those moments. Yeah. But that didn't matter so much. It just had to be the guys, the car, Agent Fox, all those things had to be there. As long as they were there and were recognisable, I knew kids would see that and go, yeah, this is the Bad Guys.
And the really depressing part is, like, that sounds so simple, right?
Yeah.
But it is a Herculean effort
Absolutely.
To get to that point.
So at one point during the process, because we had, the boss of the studio changed 3 times during the process of the Bad Guys getting to the screen. And each time there's a new boss at a studio, what they tend to do is go, all right, well, all of that stuff was being made by the old boss, so we're going to get rid of all of it, and we're going to start again. So projects get dropped all the time. The Bad Guys somehow survived the 3 things, but the guy in the middle, he had a whole bunch of ideas that he wanted to eat, and Mr. Piranha was turned into a bat at one point. They didn't tell me that. They were planning to just drop that on me at some point, and then he, like it often happens, got removed, and somebody else came in, and the bat disappeared before they had to tell me or try to sell that idea to me. And then the person who came in the third one, Margie Cohen, who runs DreamWorks now, she immediately greenlit it, and it was away. And she was a fan of the books, so
that's so important.
Yeah, absolutely. That's the thing. You've just, in those meetings, because we took the Bad Guys to every studio in town, because we wanted. That's the thing. It sounds really arrogant, but I knew the Bad Guys was really cool, and I knew I'd never have another idea that was quite as cool as that. So I didn't want to just give it away. I would rather have not made a film of it than let someone mess it up. So we took it everywhere, and everybody made their pitch, and the studio that were the biggest fans of the books were DreamWorks.
That's beautiful.
And Damon, who you said
I had a project with DreamWorks for a while. My book, I have a picture book called Punk Farm, and you know, by nature of the way these things work, it fell apart. You know, they're like, we're at that time, they're like, we are moving away from talking animal movies, and so we're dropping this project, right? And that just happens. And they had, you know, Kung Fu Panda came out after that, and they're like, oh, that can make money, and we're going to be focusing on talking animal movies right now. But you have to weather the storm. I mean, I've had 3 different books have 9 different movie options. From like you imagine a logo that pops up on the screen, I've had an option with them at some point. But again, you don't know what's around the corner. So I remain persistent about it because, I mean, it's inspiring to see how well Bad Guys did, and it was really good. Like that doesn't always happen, you know? And I think what you shared is such a testament to any of the young people who hear that story of, one, you know, don't compare your art, but also like when you're coming up, don't beat yourself up so much for where you're at because you have no idea where you're going. And clearly, like every experience that you had, even though you might have been miserable at the time, you were able to use to your benefit later with skills, whether it be in a conference room or designing these worlds. You know, I often tell young illustrators too, like when you're an illustrator, you also kind of have to be an actor because you're embodying these characters, but you also have to be the director because you're creating the shots. And so where the actor has the stage, the artist has the page. So like, I knew nothing of what you just told me, but nothing surprises me, knowing your work.
Yeah, it's really interesting.
Yeah.
That's that thing of there's a park, there's botanical gardens in Sydney, and there's a tree I call the sobbing tree. When I worked, sobbing tree. When I worked in advertising, across the road from it, every lunchtime, I would just go and sit under that tree, and I'm not ashamed to say I would sit there and cry most days and go, it's why won't this work? Why won't it work? And then. And I cannot walk that path. It just the odds of this happening seemed so remote at that point that I thought I've just got to let that voice that had been there since I was a little boy that said there's something else more than this was just about to go, psst, and it didn't. And it's that thing I couldn't let it go.
To be clear. Does everyone call it the sobbing tree, or
no,
you
just
call it?
Me.
Oh,
just
I
me.
thought like it was this weird thing in Australia. There's one tree in town that everyone cries under when they need it.
Just my personal one. Just my personal one. But yeah, it's quite a significant personal landmark for me now.
Because I do think that when people ask, you know, how do you write for kids, it's because like that kid still lives up in my brain.
Yeah.
You know, I am writing for the me that I was because I know there are kids out there that are.
Yeah.
Right. And speaking of kids that are, I would love to open this up to questions. If anyone would like to ask any questions about the sobbing tree or Aaron's lowest of lows when he thought he was going to give up, any of those questions, he's happy to talk off.
Anything you want to know. What do you want to know? Anybody got?
And just raise your hand, and there's someone running around with.
Don't be shy.
Yeah.
Oh, here we go.
Yes. Hi. I'm very curious. You talk about the walk, where you got all those ideas, so you remember that very clearly. But many years of struggle to reach that. Do you remember the time and place where you felt, okay, this is gonna be okay, and what that feeling was like?
I think it was. I know it was the first day. I mentioned the print run for Pig the Pug. The first print run was 40,000 copies, and there'd been nothing remotely like that to that point. And I lived on a really steep hill in a little house in the mountains, and my publisher called, and we were talking about something else, and I said to her, what's the print run? Assuming it would be 1,000 or 2,000 like everything else had been. And she said, the first one, we're going to do 40,000. And I froze, and I actually panicked. I thought, they're just going to be a warehouse full of books that no one's going to want. But then it sort of sank in, the commitment behind it from Scholastic. And I thought, wow, if they're taking it that seriously, maybe I'm onto something here. then they printed it again in like a couple of weeks, and I just couldn't. And that was then I just realised that it was something was happening, and then that surreal phone call from America about the bad guys in the schools. That was just too big to process at the time. There's been a series of things that have been difficult to process in the last 10 years because it's been nearly 10 years that things have gone really well, but from leaving high school to the age of 40, I can pretty confidently say nothing worked out as planned, nothing at all. So then to reach a point where suddenly it's been one surreal explosion after another has been just utterly bizarre. But I'm incredibly grateful for that in a way, because I think there's nothing about the situation that I'm in that I remotely take for granted. I'm just so deeply overwhelmed by what has happened, and I'm just so proud of it, I suppose, too. It's just an extraordinary thing to have been in the middle of. And yeah, even just being here or being at the airport, arriving in the States and going in to get a magazine or something and seeing my books in American airport bookstores, it's like, man, that still does my head in. I can't process that. Because I remember the first book I did, my very first book in Australia, it was released and it was in a bookstore, and I snuck in and I signed it, and it was the one with my signature on it was there for like the rest of the year. And
I learned the hard way, when you do that, don't date it. Yeah. Because I once found one from like 3 years prior, early in my career, and I went, oh no. They have it. Oh, they had it.
Yeah. Oh man. So yeah, no, I've never forgotten that, and that's what it was like for the longest time. And then there was that whole period too when Borders went away, and I remember, and everyone was saying books are dead and there won't be. And that was when I was working in advertising. It was that feeling of I missed it. It's just no chance for this. But yeah, it was ridiculous. And the idea when I moved my family away before the walk, it was insane. I had 2 little kids, and we moved up there, and I thought, I'm just going to do this. And there was no plan B. I don't know what we would have done. I really don't. But it worked out.
Beautiful.
What else? Nothing. You got nothing. Wait. Oh.
So, with all the excitement, how do you still enjoy it, but pushes it aside a little to write and still find your creative place? How does that work?
Well, to this point, the beautiful thing has been the bad guys blew out into this long arc of a story, which I had significantly, like in the last, a period of about 5 years ago, after the first number of them, and they were much more episodic, I thought, no, I'm going to really commit to a big arc with this. This thing is working. And I've known how the Bad Guys ends for a long time. It ends next year. Episode 20 is the last one. And I've known what the story was going to be, so I've been swimming in their universe. And Pig was effectively the same book with different scenarios. It's just a running gag. So I did those, and then 10 of those felt like a perfect amount. They were done. Thelma was done after 2. Bad Guys is 20. Cat is 3. And I'm in a place now where I've just finished them. I've just finished episode 20, and I've just finished Cat 3. They're drawn. And whisper it, I don't know what I'm going to do next. There's a bunch of stuff that I could do. I had a whole bunch of ideas that could be really cool, but I've done 40 books in 10 years. So I'm going to disappear for a while.
A nap sounds a little
Yeah.
Please.
Like Forrest Gump. I'm just
your
going to
publisher starts
cross the
sending you
country.
pamphlets about the importance of exercise.
Yeah.
Well, a man at your age should be walking.
Absolutely.
Max had his hand up right here.
Hey, man.
we've got a microphone for you, Max.
So, what inspired Cat on the Run?
Oh, there's a couple of things. I've got a cat, and her name's Maud, and she's a real princess. So there was that. And then I don't know why. Often it's just two things, two ideas in your head that'll just click together. And I was thinking about social media and my kids sort of obsessed with TikTok, and I've been watching that thing too where, you know, where kids have to communicate now with Snapchat, where they can't just send a message; they've got to film themselves sending it, and they've, no matter, even if they're having a bad day, they kind of got to pretend they're not. And I don't know, that sort of hit me. And then I don't know why, but I started thinking about the old movie The Fugitive, where someone gets accused of something they didn't do and have to go on the run and prove their innocence. And I thought, well, what would somebody these days, where everybody has a camera, and what if you were famous like Kim Kardashian is famous, and you had to be on the run? How would that work? And then I looked at my cat and I went, aha. And so it's, and yeah, but it's, all of those thoughts happen in like that. And it's like, oh, and you wrote it down. It had some other weird name for a while. And then it was, yeah, and then it went through a few names. And then, yeah, she tumbled out really. And what was interesting too is that she didn't start as a book. She started as a movie. So there's a movie of Cat on the Run in development at the moment. And I pitched it as a movie first. And then I thought, actually, would the 3 acts of the movie would actually make 3 cool installments of a book. So that's where she came from. Yeah.
I'll take the microphone. So what is your process of creating, I guess in the past, what was your process of creating the bad guys or Cat on the Run? Like, obviously you do graphic chapter books. Do you illustrate them first? Do you write a script first? Do you, I don't know, outline?
The process was largely, in the last few years at least, because I had an idea of I knew the major beat that I had to cover because I had the big long arc story of the bad guy, so I would know which major signpost moment I would want in each story, and I would usually figure out what the cliffhanger would be that would then lead into the next one, and then I would I'd sort of write out, I'd break it into chapters, what I would want to knock off in each thing and how I would want it to build, and then I would write it like a screenplay, really. And then I would do a series of rough drawings, which I would scan into the computer and then put my script on it and then just play jazz with that for a while until it felt funny enough and interesting enough and dynamic enough. And then once that's done, I would move on to finished art. So it was largely like that, really. But the reason that I would have loved to have pawned off my artwork to somebody more competent than I am at drawing, but in my head it's so clear how it's meant to play that it just inherently became, it was just easier for me to draw it. I don't think of myself as an illustrator. I know I am, but I don't really think of myself as one. It's just a means to an end for me. There's a story in my head I want to tell, and I tell it as clearly as I can with my moderate drawing skills, but I think there's a charm to that, so that's why I've also not messed with that and let that continue on. Picture books were different. I would walk, and something about the rhythm of walking, I would sort of write on. It's very unromantic. I would just write on my phone. Pig was a pug, and I'm sorry to say.
But with a quill pen.
Yeah,
Quill stylus.
Yeah. Oh yeah, that's right. Yeah. No. So that was it largely. I would just. But the process is, there's been 2 Bad Guys books a year for 10 years, and it was a great idea, I think, to do 2 a year, because it means kids don't have to wait too long for the next installment because it's a cliffhanger. But once you're on that train, each book is so much work. Because you got to remember, okay, including Cat on the Run, for the last 3 years, I begin every year with a blank page, and by the end of the year, there has to be 600 pages of illustrated content done. And that, with all the movie stuff, has been just a gigantic amount of work. It's so beautiful and so satisfying, but I think it's why it's time for that walk, because it's been a lot. Yeah. Yeah.
So I know you talked a little bit about your experience with social media. Are you kind of hoping that maybe this book talks to kids about some of the ridiculousness about it and not to take it so seriously, either the highs or the lows?
I'm hoping so, yeah. I mean, look, it's one of those things, I don't like anything that I do to be prescriptive or to feel like there's a great big hairy message in there, but it's like, the Bad Guys is about, shady characters trying to stay on the right path, and that in itself is quite a good message, but it's delivered in a roller coaster, and I think this is the same. But yes, absolutely, social media, and that's the other thing too about it is if you're writing a book for kids now, certainly in this form, it strikes me as I just look at my kids and TikTok and whatever, is if you're trying to do something that feels relevant to kids as well, is to do something that just feels like it's set well within their world, but then satirized in a way that they can dig, that doesn't feel like it's been done by an old man who's going, oh no, this is not good where you're heading. That wasn't interesting to me. It was, how can I reflect what's happening, make it feel familiar to kids, and then make fun of it at the same time. And I think, and hopefully, because it's absurd in the book, the internet turns on her instantly. So she's deeply loved, and then in a heartbeat, everybody just goes, she's evil, and that struck me as really funny, but also really pretty accurate. It happens all the time, So yes, it feels. I didn't set out to write something really timely, but it does feel like it's kind of the time that it is meant for, I suppose. Yeah. Good. Oh. One.
For sure.
Yeah.
I was just going to say, what's a fun or wholesome or silly interaction you've had with a kid fan that you want to share?
I'll repeat this. So what's a fun and or wholesome?
Yeah, just like
yeah. That'd be a great question to end on. What is a moment that you had with a reader that sticks out?
What's my favorite thing? I just, kids will. What always amazes me is when kids, the cliffhangers really kill some kids. It's like they kind of grab me by the lapels and want to know what's going to happen, and that stuff is really beautiful. This is slightly hijacking your question, but I thought of this today. I was at Books of Wonder, and there's a signed copy of Where the Wild Things Are is there, and my favourite story I've ever heard about that. This isn't about me. I'm segueing away, but it's a great story if you don't know it. Morris Sendak, who wrote Where the Wild Things Are, he got some fan mail from this little boy. And he wrote back, he was touched by it, and he wrote back and drew a little picture and sent it to this kid. And the mother got in contact with Morris Sendak, and the little boy, when he got the letter, he was so overwhelmed by it that he ate it. He just gobbled it up. And I don't think I can top that story. There's the other story that I've ever heard about, and I love this one. Again, it's not mine, but it's brilliant. There's an Irish comedian. He plays a little Casio keyboard. I can't remember what his name is, David someone or other. But he was doing a show for kids, and this kid put his hand up, and he said, "Yeah, what's your question?" And the kid said, "Is this going to get good soon?" I love that too. But yeah, look, all of my, I visited, it was over a number of years, but I visited about 218 schools. I'm pretty sure it was 218. And I would go in, and a bit like a stand-up comedian, I would take a new book in scribbly form, and I would put it on a screen, and I would sort of act it out and read it to the room. And if it felt like some parts were losing their attention, I would go back and I would rework things. I have a really silly book called Piranhas Don't Eat Bananas, which doesn't really work in America because it doesn't rhyme here. But in Australia, it's Piranhas Don't Eat Bananas. So it rhymes.
Piranhas don't eat bananas?
Yeah, it doesn't cut it here, no. But in Australia, that one particularly, it's a very silly book, but it got huge laughs all the way through, and then the last page, it always fell flat, and then I just reworked it in front of kids and did that. So I would always have these moments where, I met sort of thousands and thousands of kids, and it was always just awesome. And I think it was just, I don't know, you go to places too where there would often be not much hope, and there's something really nice about being this sort of person from another planet who comes in and I don't know, it's a bit like that stuff when we're talking about Mr. Murray and seeing things that just felt like evidence of something else, and you just never know which kid out there is going to go, well, if that guy can do it, I love that. But yeah, sorry, but I gave you a Morris Sendak story instead of one of mine.
But I can give you an Aaron Blabey story.
Oh yeah.
Okay, so talking about cliffhangers for the end of the book, but you also do a remarkable job of a cliffhanger at the end of a chapter, which then is like, dangling the carrot to keep reading. And as a parent reading to your kid, you might end on a certain chapter, you have to get to bed, and the quote from my son when we would stop at a chapter, "Oh man, come on, we read one more chapter?" And the fact that both parent and child would both be like, "Yeah, let's do one more chapter," is a big win. So congratulations on everything that you've been able to achieve, and we're grateful for you, Aaron. Thank you so much.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks, man.
Thank you.
Oh man, one more chapter.